Hi, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Vikas.
Welcome to Better in Tandem, where we explore the power of partnerships.
We're here to bring you unique conversations with amazing people working together to make brilliant things happen.
And through these conversations, you will learn the tools, techniques, highs, lows, and the secrets of working together, because life is
better in tandem. So, welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of Better in Tandem. And we're really lucky today to be joined by Sharon and Afiya Amesu. And it's going to be a really exciting conversation. And I'll hand over to Rachel to introduce why we've invited these two wonderful people to come on today's episode.
Yeah, brilliant. So I actually first met Sharon in 2018 at a female leaders conference put on by the Institute of Directors. I think it was 2018. I'm sure you might correct me. But Sharon took to the stage and absolutely hammered home a really key point about the opportunities for women to succeed in the workplace, and particularly obviously from a perspective of women in colour. And ever since then, I've been fangirling the work that Sharon does, following along. And obviously the work that she started to do with Afiya around She Leads for Legacy has really piqued my interest. And it was on that basis of, obviously, as a mother and daughter working together to tackle the really big issues around anti-racism and inclusion in the workplace, it felt only right to invite Sharon and Afiya on when we're talking about partnerships, and even more so because it's a mother-daughter relationship. I think it will give us a really interesting intergenerational lens on the topic. So yeah, we're really excited to jump in and have a conversation with you both. So in the spirit of partnership, we thought it'd be great if you'd like to introduce each other. So whoever would like to go first in introducing the other, please.
I'll go first then. So it's an absolute pleasure to be joining you both. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I'd like to introduce my co-founder of She Leads for Legacy. I often describe her as my sister, but she refutes that description. So instead, I'm forced to inform the audience that I'm actually her mother, albeit that we often are described as sisters when we're walking in the street together. So Afiya Amesu is a formidable young woman. She is a trainee barrister in the areas of clinical negligence and personal injury. She is a passionate, ambitious woman who is making waves and making a difference in the world. She is a trailblazer, a thought leader, and a dynamic young woman who knows her own mind and actually wants to be a legacy leader, making a change for her generation and those generations to come.
Wow.
And this is why we have you on the podcast.
Yeah. Wish I'd gone first. I really do. Thank you very much, Mum. Just want to stress the mum part. Sometimes people actually have said twins, and that's even more offensive, I think, than sisters.
I've had that with my mum before.
My mother, my mum, Sharon, is a leadership consultant and keynote speaker who draws on her 16 years at the Criminal Bar to inspire and encourage people to do better, go further, and be the best that they can be. I'm so grateful to have my mum. She has role modeled what it means to lead for legacy. She has role modeled what it means to be courageous, to be resilient, to pursue your passions fiercely, and know that despite the barriers and the hurdles that may come up, you can really go for what you want to do if you believe. So that is my mum in summary.
Wow, that's two wonderful introductions. And as Rachel said, it just kind of highlights why we're so keen to have you on. And I guess as a starting point, there might be a lot of people who are kind of listening in or watching this who've maybe thought about, setting up a business with their parent or, with their child. And, that relationship, whilst we don't have kids, we sort of see from our friends and family that, it can be a stressful relationship at the best of times. And so I just wonder how that conversation first came about in terms of, deciding to work together and trying to understand how best to make that work.
So really, She Leads for Legacy was born out of conversations that my mum and I had over lockdown, when we realised many of the barriers that my mum faced 20 odd years ago at the bar still were in existence for myself and other Black female barristers and aspiring barristers today. And so really our desire to work together stemmed from and understanding that this went beyond ourselves, that this wasn't just for us, but actually the notion of legacy means something for the next generation. And so our primary motivation was ensuring that other Black women today and for tomorrow don't go through what we've been through, and that we create a movement of change. So I think the primary driver actually was, this has to be bigger than us. And if bigger than us, we have to work together to solve the issue.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the things that we had immediately, because I completely understand what you're saying, Vikas, about the challenges of working with family. But one of the immediate advantages that we had were the fact that we had immediate trust. So one of the key things when it comes to building a business, building an organization with someone is, are they people that you can trust, that you know that they've got your back? Absolutely. So we had that in the bag immediately. We also had shared goals and vision immediately, a big winner. We also had shared values. So we had the same outlook. Our aperture was a sort of the same lens, as it were, of the world. And this sense that we wanted to make a difference was something that was common between us. So those fundamental key things that needed to be in place in order for us to work together were in place. And I think that's been really important for us working in tandem moving forward.
I think I love what you said there around almost the way that you've both come at it is that shared, very unified purpose, in the sense that you're all striving towards the same thing. But one thing we were quite interested in, because obviously it is a mother-daughter relationship, I was really interested to understand, have you seen any intergenerational differences in the way that you've been approaching the work? So while you're aligned on the mission and what that purpose and value is, that obviously sounds like that's a real solid foundation to build from. Have you found any interesting nuances around the kind of generational differences?
Yeah, loads. Kidding me.
So I think what I found personally is the challenges that my mum faced were slightly different. So they've been masqueraded, I guess, for me in a different way. I think that the issue is probably more nuanced, less overt, more subversive. And so how you tackle that is different in today's day and age than it was 20 odd years ago. But the core of the issue remains the same. So whilst it may appear different in terms of generational differences, actually the foundations remain the same. There is still unconscious bias. There's still racism out there, and that needs to be tackled. I think because their outlook is slightly different, and I think that's probably one of the strengths with the partnership, that even though we have very similar lived experiences, we're both Black women in the same sector, the age gap, I think, allows us to bring different lines of thinking to what we do, and consideration of different people in what we do.
I think I agree with that. And I also believe that we also have our differences exposed in this relationship, our generational differences. And I think one of the key areas that sits around is communication. So I'm the sort of person who doesn't really much like text messages, right? Just text the message. And I'm a let's have a call conversation, and let's have a more thorough input in this. And it's just very much more iterative, off the cuff, in the moment stuff. And I think that's a very interesting generational challenge that we face, as an example, around our communication styles. That's a rather interesting one, Afiya, I think.
Yeah, and I know obviously, you've talked about, Afiya, there, the difference in how those challenges kind of manifest for you versus your mum, and vice versa. Sharon, you'll see the difference. But Sharon, I think, just if I start with you, what were the kind of key things that really, that you experienced in your own career, that I guess through this work you're hoping that Afiya maybe wouldn't have to experience, or indeed could really help to change? Because I think there's that, if you like, generational history of experience, versus then the inspiration to change as well?
Yeah. So one of the most immediately obvious ones for me on that, Vikas, was me not wanting Afiya to be in the situation where she was the only one in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so often that was my experience. Now, it might seem insignificant. So what if you're the only one in the room? But just being that one person, that lone ranger, as it were, could be incredibly isolating. It generated all sorts of issues, emotions, self-doubt, questioning, real issues in relation to imposter syndrome. And that was something that I most definitely didn't want her to experience. I wanted her to have the sense, the very clear confidence that she was entitled to be in the space, that she was entitled to be practicing as a barrister and or a career professional. That was something I was very clear that I wanted for her. I also wanted it to be the case that she would expect to be able to thrive and to prosper, that she wouldn't have to get over a mental hurdle in order to do so. And indeed that those around her would also expect for her to prosper. So there wouldn't be the having to prove yourself, first of all, before you're accepted. Actually, the expectation was that you'd be just as good as your counterparts. I think what was also important for me was this sort of the unfettered choice of the career mother. So I recently posted up about the challenges that I faced internally about whether or not I was a good mother because I wanted a career, and sort of the naysaying both externally but also internally, that sort of guilty mother's cloud that hung over my head. And what I wanted for her was this belief that in fact you could have a career and you could be fulfilled and you could also be a good mother, and they weren't diametrically opposed at all, that they could work in tandem together. I also most definitely wanted her to have equal rights in the workplace, those fundamental rights of equal pay, equal access, fair treatment, access to progression opportunities. I wanted that for her in a way that I hadn't experienced. And whilst progress has been made, there are still those issues that I was concerned about that continue to exist. So it's really interesting that Afiya, whilst I was the first Black woman to enter the set of chambers that I started my career in, there has been progress. We're having better conversations. There's the legal sector, for example, is really looking at where there are gaps in relation to pay and the like within the sector. The reality is that when Afiya started out in her training a matter of months ago, she was the first Black woman in her set of chambers. And so it just highlights just how much further we have to go on these issues that I would have hoped 20 plus years on we weren't still having to wrestle with.
Was there anything at all that you wanted to kind of come in on that, Afiya, from like kind of how you've now experienced that in terms of, you know, your mum's hopes for you, and sort of like you say, to your point around maybe somewhat that subversive nature of the things that, like you say, while obviously, you know, you are in an incredible position where you are now and you've worked hard to get there, what are the kind of underlying challenges or kind of very present challenges are you seeing that are still present today? So
I found that even though there has been an element or there has been progress, there's still so much work to be done. And I think I've been fortunate to have my mum role model what you can do at bar as a Black woman, but that's not the case for everyone. And I remember when I was studying at university, I had a friend who was a Black woman at LSE studying law who said, I can't picture myself going to the bar. And I remember thinking, why can't you're going to LSE, you're doing law, why can't you go to the bar? She said, I just cannot see myself there. And so the reality is, for many people in traditional professions, they can't see themselves there. They don't think that there's a route for them to be there. They have a picture of what, say, a barrister looks like and don't think they fit that model. And so there is so much more work to be done around representation, equality of opportunity. Even at the bar itself, a recent report published by the Bar Council found that Black women on average earn £20,000 less than their white male counterparts for the same work. And that is in 2020, that was 2022 when that report was published. So there is so much work to be done. Yeah. And so whilst it's amazing to see generationally, I'm also at the bar, I've followed in my mum's footsteps in that sense, need to ensure that the next generation don't go through what I'm going through, even though steps have been made since the 90s.
Yeah. Wow. And, you know, it's clear from the conversation that, you know, you both take a great deal of inspiration from each other as well. But in your kind of careers so far, who were kind of, I guess, role models for you in this work, in terms of people who've maybe provided that opportunity, or people who've inspired you in your journey?
Do you want to go first for you, or should I?
You can go first.
Okay. So one of the key inspirations for me was my dad. And I often describe how leadership is not necessarily about titles. It's about the extent to which you're willing to mobilize the passion that you have to bring change and carry people with you. And I saw that in my dad. So I was born during the 1970s and grew up during the late 1970s and 80s. And my grandparents came to the UK during the Windrush era, brought my parents in the 1960s. And they faced clearly significant discrimination, racial discrimination in society, in the workplace, in the education system. And I remember in particular during the 1980s, my two older siblings facing real racial discrimination in school. And my dad convened a group of parents from the West Indian community to come together and bring collective voice to those issues, the West Indian Parents Forum. And I remember seeing him, who didn't have formal title, but knew that change was needed and knew that there was injustice being perpetrated and knew that it was, you do something about it or it remains the same, and therefore empowered himself and empowered his community to bring about change, significant change in that community, and children who would have been excluded, instead they fought against that, or children who were being diminished in their aspirations and schooling. In fact, they were empowered to be ambitious and be bold. And so from an early age, I had those really strong roots seeded within me that actually we have power and we have agency, and that with collective voice, we can stand true to what we believe in and really demand change where change is needed.
Wow. And Afiya, what about for you? Kind of who's been that kind of inspiration for you as well?
Do you know, there have been several inspirations, and I think my mum's spoken about my granddad and the impact that he has had on her. But as I was reflecting on this question, I thought about what modern examples of partnership are inspiring and show actually how two sides can come together and work really well. And there's a podcast actually that my mum and I listened to called The Rest is Politics, with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, one Labour, one Conservative. And they really show how you can have brilliant, insightful, thought-provoking discussions when you're actually on opposite ends of the spectrum, but willing to have conversations, willing to be vulnerable, to be candid, to speak your mind and speak from your own lived experiences, knowing that you won't be judged, but actually that you can agree to disagree. So I think they are a clear example of how you can be engaging, you can create a trusting environment, even if politically your views don't align. So The Rest is Politics. Bit of a plug there, but I would recommend.
And I think that's a really great example of almost what it feels like has been really missing in society in the last kind of couple of years, is that, you know, we're facing all this kind of, you know, we've got climate change, we've obviously got anti-racism, and we're kind of tackling that agenda. You know, there's so many intersectional issues right now that what we need, sort of what your father did, Sharon, around like bringing people to, it's about this kind of convening power now, isn't it? And having conversations and taking a moment to recognize people's lived experiences and build that. And you say, if we haven't got those foundations of trust and empathy and understanding, then how can we ever rebuild a better future? And I think that's a really great example of the power of convening and bringing people together and having conversation. And I suppose in that kind of thread, I was quite interested to get your take on this, Sharon, because obviously you've been doing a lot of consulting work over certainly the last 10 years, and obviously plenty more as well. But obviously the way that how have you seen partnerships play out in the different engagements that you've had around how businesses are trying to tackle, obviously, advancing people's opportunities, the work in the D&I space? I'm really interested to see, where have you seen good partnerships work in that area?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I'm seeing it in several areas, and one clear example that comes to mind is I'm a part of a team called the Northwest Business Leadership Team. And it's an organization that brings together essentially big businesses that work or have headquarters in the region. And it brings together leaders to look at how we can tackle the big issues that are affecting the region and be a voice of influence into central government, so that we can ensure that the levelling up agenda becomes a real lived experience for those in the North. I was struck when I joined this team by the fact that there's real diversity in terms of businesses on the team, but you also have businesses that in many ways are competing with each other. So, for example, you have on the team PwC and KPMG and EY that are operating in the same space, yet still are able to come together and say, where is the enemy that we both face, that we face collectively? And how can we turn our face collectively toward that enemy and address those issues? And I'm so inspired by what I see on the team. We for example, have formed a pledge in relation to the race equality agenda. And you could see this, it's almost like a cross-party agreement, as it were, where all of these leaders said, setting aside where there may be competition, here is where we agree. And here is where we are united. And this is where we need to bring our voice for change. And so we've had the formation of something called the diversity drivers, which is each of those organizations nominating diverse, ethnically diverse leaders from within the organization to come together and be a voice for change. And I've been struck by the power that where you of seeing a collective need and laying aside what might divide in order to focus on addressing the need.
Wow.
I think that was like a really, really powerful example of, like you say, partnership, where to what you said at the beginning around united around, and it's finding that common ground, isn't it? Like, what is that goal? What's the thing that unites us? That's, you know, takes away that competitive division that's actually causing so many of these problems.
Absolutely. It's a different mindset.
Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the questions that I also had is, in terms of that working relationship you have together, you know, you're doing something which is hard, it's complex, it's big work, there's a lot to do, and yet there's also the necessity to make sure that life remains balanced, and you do almost split those professional and family roles, let's say. And I wonder how you've both approached that to make sure that, you know, you do find some balance and you are able to set those parameters and boundaries well, because it can very quickly become all-consuming, particularly in the world of impact and change.
Yes. I think that first and foremost, one thing that has been at the core of our working relationship is this is a partnership. This is not simply parent-child. And as a result, we take responsibility equally for the work that we do. And I think that's required a lot of communication, a lot of delegation, and understanding of our roles within the organization. Also prioritizing self-care. So earlier in January, Mum and I went on a spa break to celebrate my aunt's birthday. And we just made a decision, we're not going to take any work with us. And the temptation, usually we are going to bed with a laptop on our bed working. And we said, no, that just taking some time away and realizing actually, when you take that time away, you can come back refreshed and replenished, ready to go back to work again. So I think firstly, the understanding of your roles and understanding it's a partnership within the familial relationships, but also taking that time out so you can have that break, you can recuperate, have some respite, so you're not burning out. I think that's something that, especially over lockdown, when you're cooped up, taking that time out was difficult. And so prioritizing that has been really important.
And Sharon, what about for yourself? How have you sort of approached managing those two worlds?
I don't.
Well, no, it's good. Listen, it's good to say that, because, you know, I can sit there and talk about work-life balance as much as I want, but the reality is I don't, as Rachel knows. You know,
I'm the one who's like to what you're saying there, Afiya. I'm like, so if we're going on holiday, are you not going to have any meetings? Or when are we going to have, when are you going to take a step away from your laptop? And it's almost like finding that balance, isn't it? Because some people just thrive on that on-the-go energy all the time. But like you say, there does come a point where it's like, we're having a dinner, let's maybe put the phone away and look each other in the eye.
So I'm not great at it. That's the truth of it. Yeah. And it's one of those areas that, in fact, it brings challenge, because there's misalignment. Because Afiya is very good at just creating that boundary and going, now this is, we're compartmentalizing the conversation. This is not a She Leads for Legacy moment. This is just time at the cinema. And I will see the opportunity in everything for She Leads for Legacy's progression. Everything. We could be at a musical theatre performance, and I could hear the throng of the chorus. And therein, right there, is the seed of an opportunity for She Leads for Legacy to form some kind of musical partnership. Yeah. Yes. And so my switch off button is very elusive, whereas Afiya's is much more at hand. And so that's part of the tension that we have, that I'm constantly in thinking about the next thing. And I'm very much a creative person. So I'm generating ideas constantly, whereas her style of work is very different to my own, and she's very much more focused on sort of your delivery operational stuff. So I'm coming with 20 ideas to the dozen, and we've not implemented the one that we had last week. Yeah. So it's that constant tension that we're having to navigate.
That's really interesting. So where have you sort of started to see then that division of roles then, in terms of, Afiya, how are you sort of creating that kind of relationship with how you're working with your mum? What sort of conversations or ways have you found that you've kind of got to that kind of ways of giving each other the space that you need, but then where are those moments that you are sort of coming together?
So I'll start by saying this is a work in progress. Yeah. And I think in any partnership, in any working relationship, there is always a need for compromise and understanding how people work. So as my mum said, I could just be watching TV and she'll be like, isn't that a brilliant idea for She Leads for Legacy? And I'm thinking, I just want to watch some TV. But then at the same time, I'm learning actually sometimes I need to be more flexible and create the space for her to express those ideas, rather than just be like, can we not talk about this now? Can we not discuss this now? Because it's not a She Leads for Legacy time. So I think compromise is key. My mum, I think, is learning to respect the fact that sometimes if I'm just relaxing, I would like to just relax. But at the same time, I need to give her the space. If she's in a creative flow, just because I might not be in the same place doesn't mean that I can't listen to what she's saying. And I think we've realized, so my mum and I have very similar sense of humor. We have very similar interests, but we work very, very differently.
Yeah.
And so learning to understand how we work and communicating that, I think, has been an interesting journey, something that we're still working on, but hopefully getting better at in order to really achieve what we want to achieve through She Leads for Legacy.
Yeah. And I think you're right. These things are always a work in progress. And I wonder, because I think sometimes we can learn from the good bits and the bad bits. And I wonder, are there any parts of that journey where actually that has come to a head, or there has been that kind of disagreement that you've had to work through to move forward and be stronger as a result of that conversation? For
sure, often. And so one of the things that I was going to say, because is that I think it's actually helpful to have someone who's external to that partnership bring their insights and notice what they're observing. And for us, my husband Afiya's dad is brilliant at that. He's incredibly objective. He's very well able, very capable of wearing an objective hat. And where sometimes I'd want him to be somewhat more sided with the person who he's known the longest, he doesn't at all. He's incredibly objective, and we're able to bring a scenario to him and say, all right, can you have a look at what we are experiencing here? What are you hearing from what we're describing of this somewhat intractable Gordian knot that we're just stuck at? Where can you help us see the wood for the trees here? And having that external, that third person just come in and bring their own vision, their own insights, their own observation has been incredibly powerful to help us move forward where sometimes we've just been stuck.
That's really, really fascinating, because I think we're starting to see, like, already only like two episodes in, that those things around like compromise and actually bringing in an objective lens, whether that's whether you've got mentors yourselves or how you're sort of creating a space to almost like be able to talk through a problem and like get your thinking to a place where you can then go back to the other person and be like, I've given it some thought. What about A, B, and C? And I think that's really fascinating that it's almost like in this example, like, your husband and your dad, who obviously clearly, from the work that you're doing is very much invested in you both making that change. It's almost acting as a great change advocate, because he's going to totally sort of see how that's impacting you. But in some ways, like you say, help you balance that out where there's moments where you're still sort of working that through. Has there been anything as a result of those conversations where it's given you additional insights in terms of, like you say, while you're on that journey, where as a result of those conversations, you've almost like done something differently, or you've changed your approach slightly with that objective sort of take on the situation?
Yes. So one thing that's really great about my dad is he'll come to every single event that we do. So he knows She Leads for Legacy inside out. And he also sees it from an audience perspective. So after every event, we'll debrief, and my dad will add a new perspective as an audience member. And so I think when you have someone who knows what you do intimately, is invested in seeing it succeed, but also my dad's lived experience is very different to ours. That offers a new perspective. He's really good with numbers, finance, etc. And my mum and I don't particularly like it. So even around that, he can bring reason and sound thinking. And I think it's when you have someone who's part of that trust circle, it's invaluable. He brings objectivity. As my mum said, sometimes you like him to side with you. You really want him to be switching to your way. But I think because he is objective, that he backs his thinking with reason. Yeah. And that's really, really important.
Wow. And just thinking sort of by way as a sort of roundup to our kind of wonderful conversation today, we're really conscious to make sure that when people are kind of, joining the Better in Tandem community, that they do get some kind of practical takeaways and things as well to apply to their own journey. And so I wonder maybe from each of you, if you could just share a couple of the most important tips that you've learned from your experience about how we can actually work well together, whether it's as families or as business partners, some of the things that you think for people entering partnerships, they should be really conscious of.
Yes.
So go ahead, please.
Okay. So I think the first thing is having a clear vision that you can go back to. My mum and I had a very clear picture of what we wanted to achieve with She Leads for Legacy. Now, that has been revised and it's been adapted over time, but our raison d'etre hasn't shifted. Yeah. And because of that, we're able to go back to it in both the highs and the lows, go back to what is our core purpose? What are we trying to do? And in fact, we had a conversation recently about our conference in October and whether we should talk about a certain topic. And in that conversation, we said, no, but what is our purpose? Does this align with our purpose? And when you have that clear vision, it makes making certain decisions and having certain conversations easier because you know where you fall on a certain issue. So I'd say having a very clear vision is important. And I'd also say communication is key. And I can't stress that enough. There have been some times where my mum has been frustrated about things, or I've been frustrated about things, and having the conversation, even just being able to voice concerns, has allowed a release. And I think communication in whatever form that may be, respecting how people may communicate. So my mum prefers to talk things out. Sometimes I just like to be left alone for a moment and then I'll come back to you. And understanding how people best communicate to then move past issues and move forward to what you want to achieve is really important. So I'd say clear vision and communication is two key parts of success as a partnership.
Thank you.
I completely concur with those. And communication was going to be one that I was going to reference. So I referenced two others. So one is be quick to forgive. I think that's so important. There's a great statement that a friend of ours recently, Professor Julia Rouse, shared. And she said, well, I won't give offense, I won't take offense, and I'll do my best to mend the fence. Yeah. So I won't give offense, I won't take offense, and I'll do my best to mend the fence.
Oh, I like that.
And I absolutely loved it, Rachel, because I just thought that should apply in every relationship. And the extent to which I'm much more conscious of not being so easily offended, and not wanting to cause offense in any way, but where those fences, where those bridges are broken down, being quick to rebuild them so that we can move forward. So forgiveness, actually, I think is really important. Yeah. And the other for me is being aware of my blind spots. So recently, to this point about my objective husband, I was talking about a certain characteristic which I didn't feel that I had. And so we were talking about this, I forget what it was, Afiya, do you remember? But it was this characteristic, and I said to you, Dad, I'm not like this. And it was what, sorry?
Stubborn.
Yeah, stubborn. So we were talking about the word stubborn, and I was insistent that I was not stubborn. We did this survey across the house to discover who was the most stubborn. And as it happened, I was the top of the list. And I was somewhat surprised by this, but I thought, actually, there's a blind spot that I have as to my own personality and how I'm perceived by others. And my own misconception, my blind spot about myself can clearly impair the way in which I work with Afiya. And if, in fact, I am being stubborn, that is just being difficult for the sake of it, then to what extent will that affect how we communicate, how we work together, how we progress, etc.? So I think just being conscious about being aware of your blind spots and how you come across and how you are working with others and asking those questions about how others perceive you, I think is really important to effective partnerships.
Wow. Well, Sharon, Afiya, this has been just such a wonderful conversation today, and we're really grateful for your time, and also just a massive congratulations on the extraordinary work you're both doing. And we're hoping that we're able to sort of share and amplify that work through Better in Tandem.
Yeah, definitely. And I was checking out the website the other day, and I did see the conference, and I was like, right, I need to get that on my conference list for the autumn and be there, because like you say, the work that you're doing is brilliant, and we definitely want to like play a role in, like you say, supporting and amplifying your work. So the last thing we thought we might do, if you fancied doing it, is obviously we're also learning to work together in tandem while creating this podcast. So we thought it would be fun to give our kind of guests the chance to ask us any questions, or kind of throw a little bit of a provocation back towards us around something that we might want to be considering as part of our working relationship. So you get to kind of have fun being a little bit of the interviewer briefly, if you want to throw us a question or something for us to ponder. We thought it'd be good fun.
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, Fee, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. I wanted to know what you both think makes you stronger together.
Ooh, what makes us stronger together?
So I think it's odd because we're values aligned, but I think functionally quite different. So I often describe Rachael as being the kind of sort of grounding influence in life. So every tree needs roots, and Rachael gave me roots, because otherwise I would just keep going in all sorts of different directions. And so for me, I think that's what made this work for me.
And I think for me, it's almost, and this is why I thought it was really interesting to hear the parallels between how you were working, because in some ways, not that Vikas is not my dad, but in terms of like his career is much further on than mine, and at times I'm almost like trying to find my way in my career and sort of look to him in terms of his experience. So for me, I feel stronger together in the sense that whenever I've had issues or challenges, we've almost got a wealth of experience to draw upon, in terms of, while I might have an opinion, he'll always bring me like a different market angle to it, or when he's interviewed different people. So in some ways, he always challenges my thinking, because sometimes I can be a little bit like, this is the way I'm thinking about it, and I might not take a moment to think about it from somebody else's point of view. So I can relate to your point there, Sharon.
And it's also just that mutual trust and respect, where just because, for example, it might be a conversation that we're having where just because I don't know about a specific area, Rachael will still respect my perspective, and vice versa. And also Rachel's taught me to be a cat dad. And that's been transformational in life.
Our cats make us stronger.
They do. But no,
Common purpose.
Exactly, our three little fuzzies. But no, really genuinely, this has been really remarkable, and I really hope it inspires more people to do the same, and to create wonderful intergenerational partnerships that really work. So thank you both for your time today, and we're really hoping to see you again soon.
Yeah,
thank you both. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe at betterintandem.com.